Welcome to Agile to Agility podcast with Milan Bajic.
Major show alert!
The very first value we wrote is individuals and interactions.
Let's take this another level.
Daria is going to be presenting 360 degrees of a Scrum Master, and we are really excited. Thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to your wonderful presentation.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So let me jump right in. We only have 45 minutes, and I know that I tend to speak a lot. So I want to make sure that I give you as much information as I can during this time, and then allow for some Q&A at the end. So 360 degrees of a Scrum Master. We'll talk about what it is. But first, I'd like to introduce myself. So my name is Daria Bagina. I help professionals build awesome teams with the help of Agile and Scrum practices. So I am a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org and an experienced Scrum Master. And since 2019, I am running my small business called Scrum Master that is focused on all of the things Agile and Scrum, more specifically on the role of the Scrum Master. So I provide mentorship for Scrum Masters, Agile consulting, and online courses and other resources for Scrum Masters, really to help you be more successful. So just a little bit about me. And let's jump into what we will discuss today. So I'll keep some time for the Q&A at the end. Now, I said, we're talking about 360 degrees Scrum Masters. What actually it is? What does it mean? So I use this metaphor, and I will show you what I mean by that and why it is important. Then we'll talk about how Agile maturity actually can impact your 360 degrees of what you do as a Scrum Master. We'll talk about what services are part of a Scrum Master role, more specifically when it comes to that 360 degrees Scrum Master. And then we'll talk about things that are not really part of it, but may seem like, or may be seen like important parts of the Scrum Master role, but really are not. I really hope you cannot hear the tapping, because we have neighbors who have been doing some housework in the past few days. So we have a lot of hammer time here. So what work reduces your 360 degrees? What skills does your team need to help you stay at 360 degrees? So this is really not only about the Scrum Master. It is actually about the Scrum team as well. It is an important part, and we'll see how important it is and what you can do to actually help your team be much more successful and help you be more successful in return as well. And then what skills do you need to focus on today, and how you should do that? So we'll look into that. We'll talk about those skills, the important skills that you can focus on. So let's jump into what this 360 degrees actually mean. So we'll go back to the Scrum Guide. What does it say? Scrum Master is a true leader who serves the Scrum team and the larger organization. Often that part, the larger organization, is kind of forgotten. But here, I just want to remind everyone, this is what Scrum Master role is really about. It entails three very important parts that we can see in the Scrum Guide. Of course, it's serving the Scrum team, serving the product owner, and the larger organization. And so it's all about how Scrum Master can support their team, their organization, and implement agility within the organization. So this is what I call 360 degrees. It's when the Scrum Master works on one of those three items, right? So they're focusing on either the Scrum team, the product owner, or organization, and those are the services that really create 100% of a Scrum Master or 360 degrees of a Scrum Master. Now, important point here is that it might seem like, well, maybe there are other things that I need to work on, but what really changes when how you actually work with the team, with the organization, is that your time is distributed differently depending on the maturity of your team and of your organization. So at the beginning, when your team is very new, you will be spending most of your time on your Scrum team. However, you still have that little part related to the product owner, and in the same way to the organization, right? As the team matures, then you don't need to spend as much time with your team because they are able to resolve a lot of the challenges that they are facing themselves, right? We're talking about maybe at the beginning, you need to work with your team more to help them understand Scrum or their role. Well, this is where you'll be spending a lot of time. But once they are much more mature, well, now they can do it themselves. They have that understanding. So instead, you can focus on other items, right? The two other buckets of work that you have in your 360 degrees. So the time distribution changes as the team matures, or also depending on how the organization is structured, or where do you see the most impediments, right? But you still are focusing on the three items here, and the three most important items for a Scrum Master to focus on. So what do those actually include? Well, so you might have heard about the 8 stanzas of a Scrum Master. I use this little image here in the corner and talking about the services of a Scrum Master. Right? We talk a lot about different skills that a Scrum Master needs. So when we are talking about these 3 items, organization, Scrum team, and the product owner, what are the services that the Scrum Master actually provides in relation to those 3? We can talk about teaching, obviously the example I just gave you, right? Helping your team understand the Scrum, their role in Scrum. But teaching still applies in the same way to the product owner role and the organization, right? Product owner might need us to work with them, to teach them, to coach them. In the same way, we can look at the organization. We need to work with the organization to help them understand what Scrum is, what agility is, and how can they actually implement it in the right way. So teaching applies to all 3. Same with coaching. We can see that as the organization matures, we might need to switch from pure teaching to that more of a coaching. Let's find better ways to do things, right? Let's focus on how we can adapt what we're doing. Mentoring in the same way, focusing more on practices, on best practices, on good practices, trying out different ways of working, seeing what works, what doesn't work, really kind of focusing on that practical aspect, on that experience that you bring to your organization and to your team. Facilitation, and again, might be the first idea that you have as well, facilitating retrospectives, right? But it's more than that. We're talking about facilitating discussion, facilitating consensus, facilitating conflict resolution. So there are many things that are related to that facilitation, and in the same way, it applies on all 3 items in our 360 degrees. The Scrum team, obviously facilitating, helping with potentially Scrum events, right? Facilitating retrospectives. But in the same way, the product owner might need our facilitation skills in maybe discussions with stakeholders, right? In coming up with some solutions for where the product is going, right? The roadmap, things like that, or making decisions on a bigger scale. And the same organization might need us to come in and facilitate certain discussions or certain processes that are happening in the organization. So we still have the skill that applies on all 3 levels. Leadership, of course, this is kind of a big skill. You would need to decompose it in many different items, but just to highlight that important part that the Scrum Master is a leader, right? Leader without authority. And leadership is important. It's about inspiring people, bringing them to on the right track, right? Inspiring them to to be better, to implement Scrum, to try to learn something new, to maybe fail and learn from your failures. So a lot of things that are related to leadership, and it still applies on all three levels, including the organization. Sometimes we do need to show that leadership potentially to our leaders to help them become better leaders as well. Communication, obviously, that kind of is self-explanatory, I think. And then we're going more into the hard skills that a Scrum Master would have to help them provide the services on the three levels. Knowledge of Scrum, obviously. The Scrum Master is the representation of Scrum in the organization, so they need to have very, very strong knowledge of Scrum. If you don't know it, no one will. So you have to know it, you have to be able to explain it, and you need to have very strong foundational knowledge of Scrum. Then we can look a bit further, because Scrum Master is not just about Scrum, right? It's really about bringing agility into the organization, into the team. So it might include knowledge of agile tools and practices, other services that a Scrum Master can provide. And you can think about it in terms of when the team matures, right? This is where you can spend more time on maybe looking at larger or agile tools and practices that are maybe outside of Scrum, to bring them back into your organization, into your team, right? Because we have already set up that foundation with Scrum. Now let's go further. What else can we do? How else can we improve? Because it's still all about continuous improvement. So that knowledge is definitely important and something that you would need to develop. And it can apply on all of the different levels. The same with organization or product. Stakeholder management, also important. I put this one here specifically to once again highlight the fact that a Scrum Master does not only operate on the level of a team or working with the PO, but they also work on the level of the organization. Right? This is where that work with the organization comes in, where a Scrum Master can support not only the team, kind of people on the same level of the organization, but actually going further to executive levels, to management levels, and helping the team and organization become better that way. Now, Scrum Master role requires distinct skills. So we looked at the services that the Scrum Master provides, right? But in order to provide those services, there are many different skills that we would need. I already mentioned a couple of them. Already, but just to look deeper into what those skills are. And here I would like to show you kind of like a Scrum Master development plan. This is something that I worked on in the past year, trying to really put all of that information, all of that knowledge that I have around the skills that I needed to develop as a Scrum Master into three categories. And absolutely necessary skills, what I call you have to have those to call yourself a Scrum Master, kind of the starting point, very important. You do need to focus on those, make sure you feel comfortable with them before you proceed. Core skills, also important skills for a Scrum Master to have, and I would say if you want to be a good Scrum Master, you need those skills. Now, if you want to be a great Scrum Master, then we can look into more of that progressive skills and how can you expand your knowledge and expand your influence in the team and organization. So let's look into them. And I will have all of them on one slide. I should have, now that I look at it, there's lots of text. So I'll be going one by one. I'm kind of trying to separate it into easier to manage pieces, but I have lots of them there. So let's try to focus on first on our left column. So build your 360 Scrum Master skills. Going back to our little circle, Scrum team, organization, product owner. Absolutely necessary skills. Well, we talked about Scrum knowledge. I think that is a no-brainer, obviously, absolutely a must have. you can't really call yourself a Scrum Master, I'd say, if you don't have that knowledge. Teaching, right? We talked about that. I believe that this is such an important skill because before we get to that level of leadership where people easily can follow us, we can easily motivate and inspire people, our first step to that is to be able to grab their attention enough so that they are willing to listen, right? And that for me is that teaching part. How can we as Scrum Masters help others understand, right? Being able to explain complex concepts in a simpler way, being able to create interest around learning, right? For a lot of people, maybe learning some new Scrum methodology or new processes or whatever that is something completely out of the blue. They are kind of doing their own thing in the corner. So how can you inspire them, right? Coming in as a teacher. Observation. That is honestly, the more I kind of work in this role, the more I feel this is an absolute, very important skill, the absolute must, same as listening. I have recently started working with a new team, and the first 2-3 weeks, I'm just there observing what is going on. I think if I didn't have that skill of understanding what is going on, how can I connect the dots that sometimes even people in the organization don't know how they're connected, for being able to do those connections, being able to observe and easily understand, kind of, see the temperature in the room, right? Even though we are remote, being able to observe that and being able to quickly understand what is really happening, especially things that maybe are not being said, or unspoken rules, unspoken processes. And so those that observation is so essential, especially at the very beginning. Now that I think about it, I think I took, in the first couple of weeks, I took 50 pages of notes after meeting with people, right? So, and those notes are not just me writing whatever, actually writing things that I believe are important for me to understand what is happening in this organization, these teams. So that observation and listening, very important. Now, asking questions. I didn't have this one before, but I added it here because I think this is where you start if you're kind of going into that coaching direction. Coaching is a big skill, right? There are lots of things that are involved into coaching. So is it really absolutely necessary skill from the very beginning? Maybe not, but what you need to focus on is maybe the first step, asking questions, right? And that is aligned with listening and observation so well. That is what helps you to really get to that understanding of what is happening, and being able, for when you are implementing improvements or suggesting improvements, you're driving the discussion in the right direction. For that, you need to be able to ask the right questions, right? And we can talk about things like powerful questions, like the easiest, I'd say, tool to use to start off with. More about, are you asking more questions, or are you making more suggestions during the meeting, for example? So how can you use questions to drive the discussion in the direction you think it should be going without actually telling, right? So coaching is all about questions, right? And that is an important piece that I think you can take out of that coaching, much bigger skill that you would need to develop, and start with it. And learning, of course, I think the most successful Scrum Masters are those who never stop learning. And I think the fact that you're all here shows that you want to keep learning, you want to keep growing, and you're interested in that process of becoming better, learning something new, applying something new. So that learning is what brings you to the next levels, right? Now, absolutely necessary skills. As I said, before we move on to the core skills, I'd say how comfortable are you with absolutely necessary skills? I think you need to be pretty comfortable before you start moving into the next tier of skills, right? And then we go into those core skills. Knowledge of good agile practices. Important part that is not necessarily related to Scrum. What I kind of right now looking at, what are some of the things that a Scrum Master needs to know? Say, if you were starting out the Scrum Master role right now from point zero, what would be those agile practices that you would add to your list as a must know? I'm thinking about things that are often used in the organization that often used incorrectly, so that you can come in with the right knowledge to help your team, such as estimation, understanding relative estimation. It's not Scrum, but I think it's a very important practice you need to understand so that you are able to properly implement it and explain it to your team and help them use it properly. Understanding Kanban, what it is, how do you actually implement work in progress limits, right? Things like velocity. How would you use a release burn down chart in such a way that it actually shows you progress? It doesn't put your team under pressure for not delivering on a specific date, right? How can you use all those things in your advantage? So things like that, those agile practices. Facilitation, we talked about that. Especially right now, I think if you're working remotely, well, which most of us are, I suppose. So facilitation is extremely important. Can't go anywhere without it. Definitely a must once we kind of step into that core skills. Coaching, communication, conflict resolution. Why I put conflict resolution here very specifically? Because we can say that facilitation is related to conflict resolution. Is that at this point, you need to be comfortable with conflict. Because if you want your team to be great, if you want them to be high performing, you need to not only be comfortable with conflict that is going to happen, but also sometimes even encourage it, right? To help your team figure out where do they disagree, to create transparency and actually help people come to a decision instead of maybe holding back or not sharing information that might help the team become better. So conflict is an important piece here, and I specifically wanted to put it into those core skills because I think this is the point that helps drive the team forward once we're kind of getting to that normal level of teamwork. So how can we go further? Well, we need to be able to find more optimal solutions, and that requires us to be in disagreement, right? So how can we facilitate it? How can we encourage healthy conflict and be okay with that? How can we teach others be okay with that? And then progressive skills. I just added some things that I believe are very, very important. And I would say that you can go in so many different directions from here, right? Kind of when you have those absolutely necessary skills, you are pretty comfortable with the core skills. Now you have so many different areas where you can go. And for example, when I kind of got to that point, for me, the next step was to become a trainer. I just felt that this is the path that I needed to take. Some people go more into coaching, right? They look into more expanding those tools and practices around coaching. It can be more related to systems thinking, looking at the organization, or more focused on leadership, working with executives. So there are many different paths where you can go. And that list obviously is not, it's just kind of a sneak peek of the things that you could add in there. And here is talk about knowledge of agile metrics. I think it's important, and a lot of times, if we don't implement any metrics, it's very hard to show our worth. So that is something that I would definitely focus on when you feel that you're ready to start implementing it, not only on the team level. I'm talking about the organizational level, right? Remember, you have 3 levels there. Knowledge a wide range of agile frameworks, right? We can look into things that are more technical, maybe, that might be helpful. We talked about leadership, a little bit about stakeholder management and executive coaching and mentoring. So just some of the examples of those skills that we can add into that progressive skills. Because remember, we continuously improve, we continuously learn. There's always things to learn. Even if we feel that we're doing great, there's more to learn. There's more to implement. There are lots of things happening. Now, this is 360 Scrum Master skills. So we have 3 levels: Scrum team, product owner, and the organization. So this is what I consider. These are the skills that a Scrum Master would focus on. Those are the services that I mentioned previously. Those are the services that a Scrum Master provides to the team and the organization. And those are the organization's expectations. And they are not very aligned with what services the Scrum Master usually provides. So we can see it's more about reporting status, our favorite, organization, being the pretty much like a secretary for the team, making sure everything is organized in the calendar. You own all the meetings. You invite all of the people who are needed, and the team relies on you fully. Documentation, taking notes, meeting notes, sending it out. How many notes have you created working with your team? I did a lot of that. And at some point I added a note, and I think our retrospective notes, where it said, if you're reading this, I owe you a coffee. And no one ever came for that coffee. So I guess no one really read my documentation that I was so diligently adding to our conference. Project management. Anyone was asked to create a Gantt chart? I was kind of stressed out because I had no idea how to do that. I never created one. Product backlog. Sometimes this ends up in our hands, especially if you have maybe a new product owner or a proxy product owner, right? So now you are taking care of the product backlog. And people management. That is also something that often comes up as an expectation, right? Making sure that everybody is working hard, right? They have stuff to do. So we take these. What happens is the incomplete Scrum Master. When you work on all of these items that are not the services that you should be providing to the organization, to the team, you're taken away from your 360 degrees. The more you work on these responsibilities, the less time you have on the 3 levels that you should be focusing on, right? Other responsibilities push out the Scrum Master role and give it less and less time, right? The more you focus on these, the less time you have for the right skills, but also the less time you have for helping your team actually become more mature, right? And learn the skills that they need to have. So who takes care of these work items? We still need to do some of them, right? They're still important. We need to be able to report in our progress. There's got to be kind of project and people management happening. So who takes care of this? Well, the Scrum team. The Scrum team also needs to develop some skills, because this is the only way how you can get your 360% back, 360 degrees back. And for that, you need to help them, right? You need to help your team develop those skills so that they can be successful, which will allow you to focus fully 100% on what you should be focusing on and on developing the skills that you need. So these are some of the thoughts that I had around what are some of the, in the same way, absolutely necessary skills a Scrum team has to have. What are some of the core skills and progressive skills? In the same way as we looked at the Scrum Master role here as well. So, and we're starting off here kind of looking into what would you expect from a Scrum team? Knowledge of Scrum, that is kind of starting out there. And it is an important part that has to happen at some point for your Scrum team to be able to maybe potentially onboard new team members who have never heard about Scrum and be able to teach them what Scrum is and how they should be working as part of a Scrum team versus as part of any other team that is not following the Scrum framework. Self-management, I was considering, should it be a core skill or is it an absolutely necessary skill? And the more I was thinking about it, the more I understood that if you don't focus on that self-management skill early on, it's going to be really hard to continue developing other skills because your team will be way too reliant on someone else. And that self-management is important. And I think, what does it come down to? I'd say that expectation that someone will come and tell me what to do, not enough being proactive, right? So how can we teach our team to be more proactive, asking questions, right? Being able to find solutions to maybe simple problems by themselves, not call everything an impediment, but actually only look at items that are really organizational impediments and forward those to you, but work on everything else themselves. So that self-management is important. And I think we have been taught first of all, in university, in school, in university, and then also in our first years of work, that we have a manager and we have a subordinate. So the manager will tell us what we need to do. So there is that kind of hierarchy expectation sometimes. So we are sometimes even afraid to take that initiative, afraid to self-manage. And that's why it is a skill. That's why I call it a skill, because this is something that we need to develop and we need to help our team to develop. Backlog management, that's simple, obviously, not only for the product owner. I know that it's always kind of put back on the product owner, but I do believe that the whole Scrum team needs to know, how do we manage our backlog in such a way that we have our product backlog items ready for the sprint planning, that they're refined, that we have all of the information necessary, but not too much information. And how can we manage that? Because it is not only for the product owner, for the developers as well. Teamwork, in the same way, this comes back to that cross-functionality, I'd say. Many teams look at their tasks as, this is my task, now I gave it to someone else, and now they take care of that, right? Where is the teamwork? Where is the collaboration? Well, it doesn't really happen that way, because that's kind of how our teams were organized previously. And that teamwork is another skill that we need to help our team develop, so that they're not as, I guess, reliant on you creating collaboration, and instead know how to collaborate with each other on their own. Planning and uncertainty, that is kind of, I'd say, you can also call it courage. What I mean by that is that sometimes we need to move forward, even if we don't have all the answers. And it's scary, right? Many teams do a lot of spikes, have a sprint full of spikes, because we're trying to get as much information as possible. And as a small business owner, you kind of learn that skill, that you have to plan even if you don't have all the answers. You have to act even if you don't have all the answers. And this is another skill that the team needs to be able to develop, because your time is of the essence when we are working with complex products, when we're working in constantly changing business environments. Creating great goals, I put it here. I kind of feel like it can be less important and maybe more of the skill that you would ask of your leadership first, so that they can provide you with the great goals that you can rely on. But it's still, for me, a very important skill that the team needs to be able to develop and be comfortable with creating goals. Creating goals is really hard. Good goals, I mean, actual goals that are inspiring, they're measurable, they're realistic, right? And many teams struggle with that, right? How many teams say, well, we don't know what to put for a sprint goal because it's hard, right? We don't know how to combine all of those things. Well, it is a skill. It takes time to develop. It takes time. Your first goals are going to be terrible, but you need to develop the skill, and all of these skills are developed through practice. Then splitting work by value, why I put it here, is this highlights once again that cross-functionality, right? That how important it is here is that understanding, first of all, small batch size work instead of huge items, but also that understanding that we're no longer focusing on just the flow of work in coming from one stage to the other, but actually understanding that focus on the customer. What does the customer get out of it, right? And always thinking about that. It's very easy to go back and kind of think of what I need to do versus what is the outcome I'm trying to create for my customer? What is the value I'm trying to create? So that is another necessary skill here. Some core skills I put in here: communication, obviously agile estimation. I think that's an important one. Is it really absolutely necessary right away? Is it absolutely necessary at any point? I don't think so, but it's a good skill to have. It can be very helpful. Conflict resolution also comes in here at the same level as we looked at the Scrum Master. Documentation, organization, presentation. And here I want to highlight that presentation part. The rest are pretty kind of straightforward, I believe. Presentation, it's kind of the first step towards stakeholder management. So that how can the team figure out how to talk to people from the business, customer success teams, teams coming from other parts of the organization, and convey the information in such a way that they understand. A lot of times teams, if you have a sprint planning or sprint review, the teams come in and then you have like, let me just show you the server. Well, no one wants to be in that sprint review, right? How can the team actually represent their product better? And I think it is a core skill, and it is a skill that the team needs. I know that you're a developer, and one of the reasons you became a developer is not to present, but as part of the Scrum team, it is a skill you need to have. And this is something that you can also work on with your team. And then progressive skills, they're kind of aligned a little bit with what we have on the Scrum Master role, the development plan, right? Progressive skills, coming back to that stakeholder management, being able to talk to executives, know how to talk to executives if needed. Say your product owner is on vacation, right? We're not going to wait until he or she is back. So we are able to actually communicate with our stakeholders in the right way, right? Customer collaboration, we're going back to that customer focus, how important it is, right? Being able to, once again, talk to our customers. Agile metrics, agile frameworks, kind of an extra things right there. So in order for us as Scrum Masters to be able to work at 360 degrees, we need to help our teams develop the skills that right now we're covering for, right? Because those skills, we're not focusing on the skills often, we're focusing more on implementing the process. But in order for the process to work, there are lots of skills that people need to develop. And obviously I focused here on the Scrum Master and the Scrum team, but the whole organization has some skills they need to develop, right? Let's look at the executives. Let's look at our leadership teams. They have some skills to develop as well. And maybe I'll create a list of those skills at some point that I can share as well. But right now I don't have it. This is definitely something that is absolutely needed. So we're kind of coming towards the end, and that's perfect because I am also coming towards the end with my slides. But I do want to give you a minute to think about these questions. First of all, what's your Scrum Master degree? At how many degrees are you in the Scrum Master role? I'll just give you a few seconds just to kind of think about it and identify yourself where you find yourself in. You know what's important? I see that people are putting the notes there in the chat. What's important is to know where you're at, because that's the starting point, right? Somewhere between 120 and 200. Could you please share the slide deck? I believe I can upload it to Mural. I'll check with the organizers how to give you the slide deck.
Yeah, you should be able to upload it to Mural.
Okay, yeah. Good. Depends on the week. Okay. Now, next question for you. Which skills and knowledge come easily to you and which ones are more challenging? And now this is really up to you to decide, where do you find yourself? How comfortable are you with these skills? Say on the scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable are you with the absolutely necessary skills? You can even put the rank for yourself for each skill, right? We obviously won't have time for that. Yeah. And the last question, and you will be able obviously to come back to this. What skills does your team need to build to allow you to be at 360, to increase, to get closer? Okay, won't be getting at 360 degrees right away, right? It takes time. We know change takes time. So look at your team. What are they missing? What are some of the skills you need to focus on to help them develop those skills so that you can start developing your skills? Have knowledge of Scrum. Planning and uncertainty and splitting work by value, self-management, teamwork. Yes, self-management again. Yeah, hard to create great goals in IT operations team. Goals don't have to be linked to a certain feature that you're working on. You can kind of look more higher, I'd say, on the range of what are you trying to, what is the outcome you're trying to create? Is it to make your application work faster, performance, or is it to improve the general quality, automate some tests, right? It doesn't have to be feature driven, but more broad overall. Okay, and then brings me to that Q&A slide right here. I am putting some time aside for any questions you might have. And I'm not sure how this works. I guess you can unmute yourself and just ask or put it in the chat. No questions.
One quick question, if I may.
Yeah.
We do have an engineering manager joining our Scrum teams, and this was purely because I think we all as a group were lacking on the communication part and management. So is it okay to have engineering managers in Agile team?
So in a Scrum team, you have 3 roles, right? We don't talk about the job positions. We talk about the roles. You have the role of a product owner who takes care of what you're building and makes decisions around that, the value. You have the Scrum Master, obviously, and then you have developers, so people who work on building the product. How your role is called in the organizational hierarchy or in the org chart doesn't really matter, as long as you play the role that you should be playing as part of the Scrum team. So in your case, maybe engineering manager is a developer in this case, right? So they need to act as a developer on the team. Doesn't really matter whether they have a specific position. And it is really hard for someone, coming in from more of a managerial position and work in just as a developer, but I have seen it work really well, Yeah.
We have a question in the comments. Do you have any tips on how to boost listening and observation skills?
Okay. And there's another one just above that, so that I will answer. So, do you have any tips how to boost listening and observation skills? A very, very easy approach. Stop talking. That's it. You need to be comfortable with silence, right? A lot of people hate silence. So you need to develop that skill, that ability to stay silent when it's uncomfortable. And in my classes, that often happens where, I teach a professional Scrum Master class and I ask a question, we're doing an exercise, and no one talks. So I don't talk. I'm waiting for the answer. It might feel like it's been 10 minutes, but in reality, it's been 10 seconds, right? So start there. Let me look into, do you have any tips? No, wait. There is another one. Can you share some strategies for encouraging a team to plan in uncertainty? There is some work that I think you need to do not only on the team level, but also on the management level. If you have history of managers taking your estimations as a truth that is put into the roadmap and the project plan, then you need to do some work there, because you cannot ask your team to maybe potentially do some estimations that are not really 100% correct, which they never will be. But you also need to make sure that there is the support framework behind it, that your management also will understands what it is. Like what does it mean that we're estimating, we are not sure how long it's going to take, right? Working around that. Some strategies to encouraging the team to plan in uncertainty. I think having, I don't know if you're doing the estimation, but what I find a lot of teams kind of estimating, they're just taking a new story, use a story into their sprint, and then everybody's kind of estimate, oh, it's a 5, it's an 8. Create a baseline, with something that they know. For example, an item that they have already worked on, they're familiar with, assign a number to it. And now it might be much easier for them to plan in uncertainty, because they will be comparing their new work with that baseline, and that might feel much more certain in a way. So
all right. Well, we are just over time now. We have about 10 minutes left in the break. Thank you, Daria. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm sure everyone got a lot of very useful information, and we'll be taking that to their teams going forward.
Yeah, and if you want to connect with me, You can find me at scrummaster.com. So you will see that in the mural as well. I have added links to my YouTube channel and to I have lots of free resources that you can find on my website. I would love for you to join my newsletter as well. I'm sharing some extra tips there every week. And yeah, I'm really happy to be able to share my knowledge here with you. Thank you for the questions, and I'll hope to stay connected.
Okay, thank you so much.